G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kaitlyn and I'm an American learning to live down under here in beautiful Sydney, Australia. Not too long ago I made a video about mistakes Americans make when they come to Australia, and I had somebody reach out on Instagram and ask me for some tips for Australians who are traveling to the States. So I put a little list together of things that Aussies might want to know if they're going to go travel over to the States. Now, this isn't if you're moving over to the States. This is if you're visiting for, say, a month or less. I'm not going to get into things like the visa that you'll need and the paperwork and whatnot. These are just general tips, some things that you might want to know before you plan your trip over to the States. So grab a Becky, grab a cuppa, and let's jump right into the video. Number one is tip even if you don't like it. The reality is at this point we're expected to tip about 20% to waiters and waitresses over in the States, and it does feel like maybe every 10 years it's been going up another 5%. Unfortunately, they make such little money hourly, and a lot of states it's under $3 an hour. So they rely on tips. That's literally their livelihood. So if you're going to go eat at some restaurant in the States that isn't a fast food restaurant, that isn't something like a Macca's or a Burger King or whatnot, you're going to have to tip your wait staff, and you should tip them about 20%. It's one thing if you have absolutely terrible service, but you still have to tip even if you have bad service. Even when Mark and I had really bad wait service at one time in Hawaii, we still tipped 20% because at the end of the day, that is expected. Unfortunately, it's the business model for restaurants over in the States. It's so rare to find a restaurant that actually pays its workers a full minimum wage, not just the required minimum wage for waiters and waitresses who rely on tips. So if you're not going to tip 20%, I'm sorry, don't go to the States or don't eat out at a restaurant that isn't something like a fast food chain. The reality is if you're going there, you have to respect the culture, and unfortunately, tipping your waiters and waitresses 20% is part of the culture. If you expect people to come over here and assimilate or at least respect Australian culture, you need to be willing to do the same if you're going to go over to the States. You're not sticking it to the man if you don't give that waiter or waitress a 20% tip. Instead, they're going home and they're trying to feed their families on $3 an hour. Unfortunately, that's just how it works, and until there's less lobbying or more push for change, the reality is that's the way the system is, and you not tipping a waiter or waitress that 20% isn't sticking it to the man. It isn't going to make any real change, to be quite honest. All it's doing is shortchanging that person who is there working an under minimum wage job. So number two is don't forget that tax isn't included on the price you see, and taxes vary literally from city to city. I remember in Philadelphia, the tax on most items is about 8%, but if you go just an hour south into Delaware, there's no tax at all in the entire state of Delaware. So things vary so much between cities, between states. So if you're planning on hitting some of the big cities while you're over there, check what the tax rate is going to be so you know what you're walking into. Obviously there's some items like Whole Foods and whatnot that aren't taxed, but if you're going souvenir shopping, expect there to be tax on that. If you're going on tours and whatnot, expect there to be tax when you go to pay for the tickets. And if you're buying things online, just like it is here, unfortunately, it is pretty common to also have a service fee attached. So be prepared for those little extra expenses that are going to hit every single time you buy a t-shirt from a tourist shop, buy a postcard or a keychain. Just be aware that you are going to have to pay tax that is not mentioned in the price over there. Number three, and this is just a general safety tip to be honest, don't walk around alone at night. If you're in an unfamiliar city, it's just not safe to walk around alone at night. You don't know what the neighborhood is like, and the States, it's very common for neighborhoods to be drastically different from one another. Like, it's actually pretty common for you to turn a corner or cross a street and suddenly be in a very dodgy area of a city. I know this, I grew up in Philly, which is one of the biggest cities in the US, and on top of that, I grew up in a pretty dodgy neighborhood. And I remember when neighborhoods used to be dodgy, but then they got gentrified, and now they're very nice, but you still wouldn't want to walk alone at night, even in the nicer neighborhoods. Just be smart, be safe when you're going over there. Don't walk around alone at night. Even if you're planning on just going a couple blocks away, feel free to take an Uber. It's a little bit safer and it's a little bit more reliable. You don't know who's out there, and remember, obviously, the Second Amendment, gun laws, you know the drill at this point. Just be safe. You don't know where you are. You're in a new area. Don't walk alone at night. Number 4 is be prepared for a lack of sincerity from a lot of customer service people. A lot of waiters and waitresses, a lot of the retail staff. Expect that fake customer service, I'm kind of dying inside a little bit, but I have to be here to get a paycheck smile. So this isn't nearly as common in Australia as it is in the States from what I've seen. Obviously, I know plenty of people who work these retail jobs, who work in restaurants and whatnot, who don't really want to be there. Let's face it, it's not exactly the most fun, exciting job. It's not something that a lot of people aspire to be, and that's why you see a lot of younger people or pensioners working these jobs. There's more flexible hours, yada yada yada. I'm sure a lot of us who've watched this have worked retail or worked at a restaurant, and overall we just get it. But in the States, remember, a lot of this is tied to tipping. So you are going to see that really fake smile a lot. You're going to have waiters and waitresses come up to you a lot more frequently than you would over here in Australia to see if you want drink refills, to see if you want a dessert. It's very, very common for you to be asked 3, 4, 5 times throughout a meal if everything's okay. Can I get you a refill on your drink? Do you want anything else? Can I clear that plate for you? You're going to hear that a lot more often in America because that is considered good customer service. And honestly, that's a lot more work on these American workers as well. So they do work very frustrating jobs, and honestly, it's a lot of hard work. I know a lot of people in my family who used to work as waitresses. It takes a lot to work around people, especially in that type of customer service environment. So you are going to see a lot of fake smiles. Expect an overall lack of sincerity. They're really trying to get you in, make sure that you have a good service so you tip that 20%, and then get you out to clear the table to put a next person in there. So expect that lack of sincerity. It's not really something that's seen as offensive in America. It's just something that's very, very expected. Number 5, get health insurance. If you want to make a joke about American healthcare, that's one thing, but if you break a leg, if you get sick, you're going to be slammed with that hospital bill that you still have to pay. So get good health coverage before you go to the States. Health insurance, at least travel health insurance, is actually very, very affordable for the most part. And if you're going over to the States, do not skimp on this, please. You do not want to be the person that decides to go on a ski trip but then breaks their leg and is stuck with a $100,000 hospital bill for a broken bone. There's no reciprocity between Australian Medicare and the US health system. Medicare is not going to help you if you hurt yourself or if you get sick over in the States. So get good health insurance before you go over there. You don't want to be one of those people who has some horror story about dealing with the American healthcare system. So yes, it's a little bit more of an extra expense, but trust me, it is so, so worth it. Even if you don't need it, at least there's a little bit of peace of mind if something goes wrong. My 6th tip is bring cash. You'd be surprised how many places in the States are still cash only, especially in some of the bigger cities, in some of the more smaller shops like these smaller pharmacies, or some of the smaller souvenir shops. You'll find a lot of places that take cash only, or they'll only accept a card minimum of $10 to $15. So if you're just running in to buy a bottle of water, you'll need cash on you in order to pay for it. Not every place does credit cards, and even though obviously the vast majority of them do, a lot of the smaller shops do have this $10 or $15 rule where you need a minimum in order to use your card. So if you're just going to run in and get something small, make sure that you have cash available on you. I know it's a little bit annoying to get the change and whatnot afterwards, but bring a few bills with you and don't bring high notes if you can avoid it. Most of the places that'll take hundreds and even 50s are really, really big box stores like Walmart's or Target's or big grocery stores. Your small little mom and pop shops normally won't take anything bigger than a $20 bill. Some restaurants are like this as well. They'll only take 20s, some won't take 50s, some won't take hundreds. So be sure that you have a variety of bills on you, and if you can, keep some slightly smaller bills on hand. They're so much more convenient than carrying around a couple of hundreds in your wallet. So America is a little bit behind Australia when it comes to things like paying. Tap and Go is something that is still very, very new over in the States. Obviously with things like Apple Pay, it's starting to pick up, but in a lot of places you still have to actually insert your card, and in some places they still don't even read microchips. You still have to swipe your card. Remember when you actually had to swipe instead of just tapping in order to pay? Yeah, you'll find places in the States that are like that as well. So be prepared to tap less, to insert or swipe a lot more over in the States if you're using your card. Tap and Go is not nearly as common, and it's not going to be a very reliable payment method if you don't have an actual physical card with you and you're planning on using your phone to pay for most of your trip. So number 8, very similar to what it's like over here in Australia, and that is to bring bags with you if you're going shopping. Some states, some cities are starting to outlaw plastic bags. We weren't able to use a single plastic bag over in Hawaii. We had to bring bags, or we had to buy those sort of flimsy canvas bags for about $1 each. Sometimes your only option is to buy those $1 a piece canvas bags. You don't have paper bags, or you don't have those really thick, sturdy plastic bags that you can get in places like a Woolies or a Kohl's when you go shopping. You have to buy the canvas bags if you don't bring your own bags with you. So if you have room in your suitcase, or if you want to buy a couple of sort of souvenir bags, do it early on in your trip so that way you have bags that you can bring with you. Some states and some cities have outlawed plastic bags completely. So you might want to double check that depending on where you're going. But I know at least Hawaii and in Philly now, they've actually banned plastic bags. This one's a little unfortunate, but Americans are not as recycle savvy as a lot of Aussies are. So if you're looking around for a recycling bin and you don't see one, you just have to throw it in the trash. Unfortunately, recycling is not as common over in the States as it is here. You'll see some areas to recycle in the States, but you'll find those in some of the really big cities. You won't find them in some of the smaller towns, or even in certain sections of the city, depending on where you are. So don't be surprised if you're walking around and you don't see a recycle bin anywhere, and you have a can of Coke that you just finished drinking and you want to recycle it. If there's no recycle bin, unfortunately, it just goes in the trash. That's how it is in the States. And it's a little bit frustrating. If you want to carry that can of Coke around with you for the next 3 hours until you find a recycling bin, obviously, you do you, go for it. But if you're looking around and can't find one, there just isn't one. Number 10, the last tip for you guys, is that only the major cities have any sort of semi-reliable public transportation. Obviously, we know how popular the New York metro system is. We see it in plenty of movies, but even in a lot of the bigger cities, public transport isn't really that reliable, and even if it's kind of reliable, it's not very frequent. I used to take the train from my neighborhood in Northeast Philly all the way to the middle of the city. It was like a little half-hour train ride. The train only came once an hour, and that was Monday through Saturday. On Sunday, it came once every 3 hours. So buses are very slow, trains are very slow. Don't expect them to come nearly as frequently as they do in the big cities over here. You're not going to be able to catch a train every 10 or 15 minutes in a lot of cities like you can in places like Sydney or Melbourne. Buses aren't as frequent, they're not as reliable, and if you're going during peak hour, expect those buses to be crammed. They will turn people away once the buses get too full. So if you're going to be traveling around a lot, be expected to rely on things like Uber and Lyft when you're over in the States. Obviously, if you want to check, and depending on the city you're in, you think that you'd be able to rely on the public transport system a little bit more. Like say you're in New York, they're pretty reliable. If you're in places like Philly or DC, not nearly as reliable. So really it just depends on the city you're visiting. If you want to do a little bit of research ahead of time, take a look to see how reliable their public transport system is, because you don't want to get into a city, plan on just taking the trains or buses, and then find out that the trains that you want to take only run once an hour. So that's it for this video, you guys. I hope that at least some of these tips were helpful. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe button down below to join our little Amer-Australian family. Also, check out my Instagram, and I just started posting on TikTok recently as well. So check those out. I post original content on there that you will never see on YouTube. So go follow me over there as well. Join the little Amer-Australian family on these growing social media platforms. I post on YouTube on Monday and normally Thursdays about the differences between American and Australian culture and the overall process of learning to live down under. My name's Kaitlyn, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.